Tonight's topic is breaking our addiction to our minds. So just consider that for a moment. Do you consider yourself a drinking addict, a thinking addict, When you reflect on, with your mind, reflecting on your relationship to your mind, how often are you drawn into thoughts you don't really want to be thinking? Identified with those voices in our head that are not wise, are not friendly, are not compassionate? How much of our lives are we pushed around by this human mind? And when I say mind, I mean all of the thoughts that include memories and plans, fantasies, hope and fear. All of the emotions. When I say mind, I'm talking about, ruminating and worrying and doubting and fearing and also the pleasant emotional states, also loving and caring about ourselves and caring about each other. All of this, from Buddhist perspective, is mental activity. Sometimes we like to make what I consider a false distinction between the heart and the mind. The Buddha had one word for the heart and the mind, the same word, citta. And he talked about awakening citta, this term bodhicitta, enlightened heart, enlightened mind. That famous teaching from the Buddha where he says, the mind is the forerunner of all things. Our thoughts create our reality. Our thoughts and our emotions and our thoughts that arise in our brains create our physical reality, our emotional reality. How we relate to our heart and mind, I'll just say the mind. I was reading this really great passage from Ajahn Chah recently where he was talking about the untrained heart is like a tiger stuck in a cage. And that what we're doing with the Dharma is training the heart. That the untrained heart is untrustworthy and will gut you into all of the suffering that you've experienced so far. And that through training the heart, the mind, we will find the liberation we've always been seeking, the happiness that we took birth to find. So I think that what I'll do is I'll do some commentary on this passage from Against the Stream. This chapter, if you have the book, it starts on 97, and it's called Finding Freedom, Breaking the Addiction. And I'll read some of it and do some commentary. One of the problems we face as spiritual revolutionaries is that we get comfortable. Even though we don't always like what we are experiencing, it is familiar. We don't like the dissatisfaction, the suffering, and the difficulty of life. We wish it were different, but we're so comfortable in it. It's all we've ever known. Like a child who is abused by their parents, a child who screams for the familiar comfort of those parents as they're being hauled off by the police for being beaten to a pulp. Most of the time, we'd rather stay with the familiar than face the unknown, even when what's familiar is our suffering. We are so used to our confusion that when the choice for freedom comes, we think, no way, it's too hard. Because the unknown is too scary. We go through our lives repeating patterns of thought and action, even when they bring us pain. So I offer you this passage and all of this talk for your reflection, your contemplation. Do you see some of that in your life, doing the same things over and over and not being happy with the results, but continuing down the same paths? We can also get lost in delusional philosophies that explain the difficulties of life. We like such philosophies because being scared, we feel we have to have the right answer all of the time. Many of the world's religious traditions are a direct reaction to the confusion and difficulty of life. It is difficult to rest in not knowing, so we create the delusion of knowledge. Humans devise creation myths, psychological theories, cultural norms, political beliefs, and religions, all in a vain attempt to appease or control their core feelings of insecurity and not knowing. So again, here we are practicing talking about the Buddha's teachings, but as you look at your life, how many other paths have you been down that you are trying to find some security, in this Judeo-Christian culture where we have all of these creation myths and religious norms that sort of explain the human dilemma without giving us any real tools, real practical tools to deal with it. What Buddhism offers that differs from most other theories is a direct experience of what is true. Buddhism doesn't ask for blind faith or belief. It offers a practical path to walk. We cannot find freedom by thinking about it with an untrained mind. The untrained mind is not trustworthy. It is filled with greed and hatred and delusion. Only the mind trained in mindfulness, friendliness, and investigation can directly experience the freedom from suffering that will satisfy the natural longing for security. This is the wisdom of insecurity. The wisdom of insecurity. I stole that from the title of a book by Alan Watts. And this perspective that in this world of impermanence, of constant change, we're in these bodies that are wired to cling, to attach, to want security, to want some sort of external safety in this world where there is no promise of safety, where there's nothing that we can cling to that's not going to change, that's not going to be impermanent. That one of the highest realizations is our lack of security. That there's nothing worth clinging to. And learning to rest in that constantly changing reality and have the wisdom that there's nothing to hold on to. In our relationships, we can often see the manifestation of this fear of the unknown. We go through our lives attached to our familiar suffering by getting into the same type of unsatisfactory relationship again and again. How many times do we have to fall in love with someone just like mommy or daddy before we acknowledge the pattern of seeking love as an attempt to heal an old wound? Does it ever really work? With mindful investigation, we can see for ourselves that our patterns and habitual reactions are, and from the place of true knowledge, we can then begin to choose our responses, actions, and partners more wisely. Life doesn't have to be so unsatisfactory. This is the good news. There is a cause to our confusion and suffering. It is our relationship to craving. And that cause can be altered to bring about a different effect. Notice that I don't say it's craving itself that's the problem. That's just a natural phenomena of the conditioned heart-mind. No, the problem lies in our addiction to satisfying the craving. We all experience craving. When we have a pleasant experience, we crave for more of it. We wish for it to increase or at least to last. When we have an unpleasant experience, we crave for it to go away. We feel the need to escape from pain, to destroy it, and to replace it with pleasure. We are addicted to pleasure, in part because we confuse pleasure with happiness. We would all say that deep down, all we want is to be happy. Yet we don't have a realistic understanding of what happiness really is. Happiness is closer to the experience of acceptance and contentment than it is to pleasure. True happiness exists as the spacious and compassionate heart's willingness to feel whatever is present. So again, I just pause for you to contemplate. And as you listen to the Dharma, we listen to the Dharma as a meditation, trying not to just think about it the whole time, but just see, does it resonate? How does it feel in your body when you hear these words? Some mental investigation is useful, but also just watching how the mind wants to argue, and also is exactly what these passages are saying. The mind is looking for security, looking for something to hold on to. When the Dharma's invitation is to let go and turn towards and see the mind more clearly. And there is wisdom in our minds, and there is also ignorance in our minds. And the more we free ourselves from identification with the ignorance, the more wisdom has a place. Though pleasure is in no way the enemy in our search for happiness, it comes and goes. When it's here, we tend to grasp at it. When it's gone, we want more. That addiction is the untrained heart-mind's natural reaction to anything pleasurable. This is clear in the Buddha's second noble truth. The cause of suffering is this experience of repetitive craving for pleasure. Though we speak of, for example, drug addicts, what we are really addicted to isn't substances, drugs or sex or food or alcohol, but we are addicted to our own minds. We are addicted to that part of the mind that craves, that says we must satisfy this desire or that. Even in 12-step recovery programs, it is said that the drugs and alcohol are only a symptom of an internal imbalance. That's why I said earlier that our relationship to craving is the problem, and not some substance itself. It's not the drugs, it's not the food, it's not the money that we're addicted to. It's that mind state that is giving us this delusional information, saying we have to have it. And we pay the price for the relationship to craving. Our suffering in life is due to our addiction to our thoughts and desires. We wander through life constantly craving more of the pleasant stuff and less of the unpleasant. This is the place where spiritual practice as a form of rebellion comes in. In my own experience, and the Buddha's against the stream principle tells me that it is counterinstinctual. It goes against our very human instincts to accept pain and not chase pleasure. It is a veritable internal battle, because breaking the addiction to our knee-jerk satisfaction of craving goes against our natural human tendencies. When life is uncomfortable, we naturally want it to change. When life is good, we want things to stay as they are. It goes against our nature to stop trying to satisfy our craving, to allow the craving to be there without reacting to it. Few of us have the courage to accept pain as pain and pleasure as pleasure, and to find the place of peace and serenity that accepts both pain and pleasure as impermanent and ultimately impersonal. But our confusion may also go beyond the courage to train the mind. Other than Buddhism, few teachings even allow for the possibility of this kind of freedom. Most of us have a fantasy of spiritual awakening as being purely pleasurable all the time. This fits right in with our craving for pleasure, but also with the creation of more suffering. The awakening of the Buddha within each one of us is the experience of non-suffering. Not suffering could be considered blissful in comparison to suffering, but that does not mean that it is pleasurable all of the time. We have to let go of our fantasy of unending pleasure and the craving for a pain-free existence. This is not the kind of spiritual awakening that the Buddhist path offers. When you hear something like that, you have to check your own commitment. Are you still in if you're not signing up for bliss, if you're not signing up for pain-free existence? It's one of the things that I actually trust about the Buddha's teachings in a way that I have a lot of skepticism of a lot of other teachings, because it to me it very much feels like this practical, realistic goal, which is, can we get free from creating all of these extra layers of suffering on top of the already often painful human experience? And it's not offering that the human experience is going to become non-painful, but that we will develop enough compassion for the pain, enough acceptance of life as it is, that we won't suffer about it. That feels like something we can do, rather than this spiritual make-believe ideas that you're going to get enlightened and experience joy all of the time. The Buddha in his awakening said, I still experience all of this pain. I've got this very difficult community. I'm being accused of stuff. I'm being attacked. The Buddha was public enemy number one in so many ways in his culture. He was speaking out against what he saw as delusional theism, and the theists hated him. And the racist structure of his society that he was trying to politically engage with and dismantle, he was not well loved by the masses. He was rejected and attacked, and he said it's quite painful. Physically, he had wounds and illnesses, and he said the pain continues, but now I've learned to meet it with compassion. I've learned to not take it all so personally, and I don't suffer about it anymore. And to me, that sounds like something that we can actually do. The important question then is, how do we break this addiction? How do we loosen our identification with craving and the satisfaction of our desires? How do we break our addiction to our minds? How do we get free? The untrained mind, the natural state of human consciousness, has very little free will. We talk easily about free will, about freedom of choice, but I propose that without training the mind, we don't truly have the ability to choose. We are actually slaves to, or addicted to, the dictates of the past, of our conditioning, of our karma, or past actions. The Buddha outlines this clearly and in great detail in the teachings of dependent origination. This is Buddhist psychology. As we saw in the earlier discussions of understanding, the Buddha understands how we create suffering for ourselves, how we tend to be victims of the past, how we don't have free will unless we bring awareness and attention to this process of mindfulness of the present moment. The short version of this principle is that we have the ability to break our habitual, addictive reactions through close attention to our mind and body. Mindfulness gives us free will. The foundational practice is paying attention to our mind, our body, and our present time experience. It is hard to pay attention because we have to face some ugly truths and tolerate some discomfort. One ugly truth may be that our fear, lust, or anger is all we see in the beginning. Since the mind does not easily pay attention to the present, effort is necessary. The mind, which is all over the place from one moment to the next, has to be trained. The Buddha said the mind was like a monkey swinging in a tree from one branch to the next. Yes, that is what the mind does. It swings from one thought to the next, from the future to the past, from planning to remembering, from self-hatred to grandiosity. To get some stability, we need the intentional effort of repeatedly bringing the attention back, of paying attention to the present time experience of breath and body, mind states and emotions, over and over returning. In fact, we are paying attention to something all of the time. Though it may be a fantasy in our mind, perhaps a daydream about a more pleasant future, through redirecting our attention to the present moment, to the simple reality of our breath and body, through investigation of the feeling tone of each experience, we open ourselves to the possibility of freedom. Right now, there's this experience of sitting here listening to this talk. As you check in with your own body, heart, mind, is it pleasant or unpleasant? Are you meeting the discomfort in your body with aversion or compassion? Bringing awareness to the feeling tone in this moment allows us to relax and release the aversion. Our habitual tendency when there is discomfort is to push it away. But the aversion to that discomfort seems to make it grow bigger, and pretty soon we begin squirming around, or we feel that we have to run out of the room because sitting still is a pain in the ass. Awareness of the desire for things to be other than the way they are is key. Thus, the first step in breaking the addiction is acknowledging the unsatisfactory nature of both pleasure and pain. We do this by being vigilant toward and aware of the presence of dissatisfaction, the desire for things to be different. Yet we also need to pay attention to moments of ease and well-being, the experience of non-attachment, when the mind is free from suffering. We are usually hyper-vigilant when something is uncomfortable, yet when it was pleasurable or peaceful, we often pay no attention, except perhaps to think about how we are going to get more of that pleasure. Awareness of the lack of satisfaction and of the craving for things to be different allows us to take the next step towards freedom. We can relax the clinging of the mind and body and simply accept what we feel, a craving for more or less of the thing. We can ask ourselves, can I accept this moment at this time? Can I acknowledge that this is the way it is? And though I want things to be different, can I let go of that aversion and let things be the way they are? I feel like I've been talking for a while. I'm going to continue, but I'd like to pause the teaching piece and go into a meditative practice in order to break our addiction to the mind and train the mind. Turn the mind into an ally rather than the cause of suffering, actually the source of wisdom. We have to meditate. So please join me. Find a way to sit that's upright and relaxed. And when you're ready, allow your eyes to be closed. Establishing mindfulness, present time, non-judgmental, kind awareness in the body. The first step in breaking our addiction to the mind, the identification, taking it all personal, is learning to redirect our awareness out of the thinking mind and into the feeling body. Bringing attention to the sensations that the breath creates. In this way, we're not stopping thoughts, but we are stopping thinking about them. We're stopping engaging with the thoughts. Let them be in the background. Over and over returning to the breath, to the body, with an attitude of friendliness and the intention to accept this moment just as it is. Breath coming and going, sounds arising and passing. Thoughts appearing and disappearing in the background. Release all of the tension that you can release. Breathing in, feel the sensations created at the nostrils. Breathing out, soften your belly. Let the belly fall, be its natural shape, round or flat. Each time you get involved in a thought, disengage. See that you can choose to return to the body. Let that thought be impermanent, arise and pass. You don't have to engage with it. First step in breaking the addiction to the mind is abstaining from intentional thought while meditating. Just using the mind to investigate, to receive the present time experience. Letting go of the future and the past. Not engaging of thoughts that aren't about this moment, here. Sitting, breathing. Finding freedom in the present. If you're new to the practice, you can continue to return to the breath. What I'm talking about in this teaching tonight demands more than just ignoring the mind. Breaking our addiction to pleasure, our aversion to pain, comes in the second foundation when we expand from the breath awareness to the whole body, your heart, your mind, your sense doors. When we turn towards the feeling tone, what's pleasant here and now, what's unpleasant here and now, the subtle discomforts, the subtle pleasures, or perhaps neutrality. Mindfulness of what's happening, thoughts, feelings, sensations, sounds and smells, sights. What's happening and your perception of whether they are pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral. This is where the real freedom comes, where we can respond, learn to respond rather than react. Watch how the mind craves for pleasure, resents pain. Watch how the body rejects the unpleasant, craves for comfort. Inclining the heart-mind towards compassion for all of the unpleasantness, moment to moment experienced in the body. Learning to meet our pain first with tolerance and acceptance, then with mercy and compassion. This is physical, emotional, and mental. Tending to our own wounds. Be gentle with yourself, but also be steadfast in your commitment to turn towards and to feel. Don't believe that part of your mind that says you can't, that says it's too much. Just keep breathing into, softening around, and opening to your own sorrow. Inclining the heart and mind to respond with non-attached appreciation to all of the pleasant thoughts and feelings and sensations in this human body, heart, mind. Enjoy pleasure as it arises and passes, without clinging to it. Even the tranquility of the mind, the joy, the rapture that arises sometimes in meditation, not worth clinging to. But totally worthy of appreciating and enjoying. Non-attached appreciation is our intention. Letting go, letting be. Turning inward, we see more clearly the impermanent nature of all phenomena. Thoughts and feelings arising and passing. Sounds coming and going. Sensations constantly changing. the more we understand the impermanent nature, the more we start to let go and not try to find our security in impermanence. We wake up to the unreliable, the unsatisfactory nature of all things. The more we observe the mind rather than ignore it, the mind doesn't need to be still or quiet. It's just another part of the phenomena of being. The lungs breathe, the heart beats. The mind thinks. It's not our enemy. But obeying the mind all of the time creates so much suffering for us. Breaking our addiction, we turn towards the mind with kindness, with compassion, with mercy and forgiveness. We understand how impersonal so much of this human experience is. It's not your fault. You can't fully control it, but you do have so much influence over how you respond to it. With mindfulness, we begin to choose a wiser, more compassionate response to our own minds. As we break our addiction to our minds, taking it all personal all of the time, we can begin to experience the ordinary 10,000 joys of existence, as well as the ordinary 10,000 sorrows of existence. Our lives are full of loss and grief, difficulties. Learning to be uncomfortable, learning to feel our feelings fully, both the joy and the sorrow. Disengage from the thought. Allow it to arise and pass. See your thoughts like bubbles floating by. Each bubble has a plan, a memory, a hope, a fear, fantasy. You don't have to chase them. You don't have to be seduced by the mind's fears. Just know it as fear. When you're ready, allowing your eyes to be open. If you're tuned in on Instagram and you'd like to join for the Q&A, easier if you do that over here at the YouTube channel where I'm streaming the Against the Stream Meditation YouTube channel. And I'm going to stop and restart this Insta. I'll be back. Come to YouTube. So I'll share a couple more pieces from this chapter in the book and then open up for some dialogue, some Q&A. The Buddha suggests that once we've acknowledged our clinging or our aversion, if we can't easily let it go, we should try redirecting our attention to something else, to another place in the body that is not painful. So if we're really stuck in aversion or clinging and we, and are kind of asking the mind to let it go or to accept it and we can't, sometimes the Buddha says just redirect the attention. Another level of Buddhist practice that addresses craving is inquiry. We can investigate what's going on. What is underneath the desire for more or less? What is motivating or fueling this aversion? Why is this thought pattern being played over and over? When I really start to investigate my aversion, anger, or lust, I almost always find that what is fueling it underneath is some fear, a base level fear that I'm not going to get what I want or I'm going to lose what I have. Sometimes it even manifests as a fear that I won't be able to tolerate the fear. I know I'm not alone in this. Underneath our ego and anger and lust is often the insecurity of fear, which we find when we investigate. Once we recognize it as fear, we can reflect on the fact that fear is not an excuse for inaction. We can then take the next breath or another action and learn to live with fear as a constant companion. If we lived our lives taking action only when fear was not at play, we would do very little. I certainly never would have started meditating in the first place or begun to teach. Almost every time I walk into a prison yard to teach a class, or some fear arises, but it's not a problem, just an old, familiar companion. In fact, for spiritual revolutionaries, the wisdom of insecurity becomes our greatest teacher. Another level of inquiry is to look closely at our mind to see who is experiencing this fear. Whose fear is this? Is it mine? Sometimes it becomes clear that the voices of fear are not even our own. We are hearing our parents, teachers, friends, or enemies. We have incorporated those voices into our psyche and have been believing them our whole life, thinking that the feelings and thoughts of fear were somehow personal. On a deeper level, we investigate what the sense of self is that seems to be the owner of experience. Who is really experiencing all of this craving? It's really just the mind, isn't it? Just more impermanent thoughts arising and passing. If neither letting go nor investigating works, another skillful way to address craving is to attempt to replace it by actively reflecting on love, courage, kindness. Some negative mind states are still just mind states. We can try to replace them with positive mind states, loving kindness, meditation, forgiveness, compassion. Becoming aware of what we are addicted to and becoming committed to getting free from our misidentification with and addiction to our minds, thoughts, and feelings requires a level of renunciation. A level of being honest with ourselves and realizing that we keep doing the same thing over and over, and the outcome is unsatisfactory every time. Part of our work as spiritual revolutionaries is to break the denial of believing that things are going to be different this time. And then beginning to change our inner and outer actions. Here's a simple story I've paraphrased from Portia Nelson's "There's a Hole in My Sidewalk" that points to the process by which these changes are often made. It takes place in 5 phases or chapters. A woman is walking down the street and there is a hole in the middle in the street, and she falls down into it and doesn't know what happened. And it takes her a long time to get out of that hole. The next time she walks down the same street, she knows there's a hole there, but she's attracted to it, and she gets curious and falls in again. But it takes her less time to get out. The next time she walks down the same street, she knows there's a hole there, but she's pretty sure she can jump over it, and she tries to jump over, but falls in again. The next time she walks down the same street, she knows the danger, but is still curious. So she walks up to the hole and looks in thinking, damn, that's a deep hole. But she doesn't fall into it, and this time she carefully walks around it. Finally, she chooses to walk down a different street, deciding that she won't walk down that old street anymore because she knows there's a hole there. When we take on a spiritual practice, the Buddhist path, there's all of the stuff that we add. We start meditating and hopefully doing some service and generosity and training the mind and the heart, forgiving ourselves, forgiving other people. We add some discipline, some practice to our life. And we also have to subtract renunciation. We have to say, like, I just don't lie anymore. I just don't kill anymore. I just don't steal anymore. There's just all of this stuff that we just stop doing. Renunciation. I just don't walk down that street. Lying is never a good thing to do. It always causes suffering. Stealing, cheating, sexual misconduct, we just stop. Renunciation key. On the path of the revolutionary, we need to have that level of renunciation, a commitment that we are not going to walk down the inner streets of greed, hatred, and delusion anymore. Of course, it isn't so simple. Our habits and grasping are so deep. But it all starts with the intention to change, to find new ways of relating to our mind. All of this points towards breaking the addiction to pleasure and the aversion to pain. We each have to ask ourselves, what do we really want in our lives? Short-term satisfaction of craving? Or long-term peace of mind and the healing of the heart that will lead to wisdom and compassion? When we choose the path of wanting long-term peace, freedom, and true happiness in our lives, then rather than the short-term satisfaction of pleasure and desire, then the effort to train the mind is there. This has been my experience. When I really keep in the forefront that my intention in this life is to be free, then being of service and practicing meditation and doing what I do to get free becomes the only rational decision. This takes discipline and effort and a deep commitment. It takes a form of rebellion, both inward and outward, because we are not only subverting our own conditioning, we are also walking a path that is totally countercultural. The status quo in our world is to be attached to pleasure and to avoid all unpleasant experiences. Our path leads upstream against the normal human confusions and suffering. And at times waking up can feel isolating on some level. That's part of the burden of the real revolutionary. On the relative level, we may feel separate from the masses. Yet as the practice deepens, on the ultimate level, we begin to understand the total interdependence and non-separateness of all beings. The commitment to waking up takes stamina. Steadfastness and perseverance are a necessity if we are to continue on a long-term spiritual path. I wish I could say that there's some sort of magical secret to all of this, that this or that is what it takes to persevere. But I have no easy solution. What it feels like to me is grace, which is a very un-Buddhist term. Truth is, I don't know why some people get on the path and learn to see the ways we create suffering, yet don't follow through to its liberation. It's a bit like some alcoholics and addicts who get sober and start doing this process and recover, but then they can't stay sober, can't stay clean. Reflecting on my experience, I feel as if it's been some sort of grace that keeps the fire burning. The craving for freedom has become more intense in me than the craving for pleasure. I've been blessed with the willingness to postpone short-term satisfaction for long-term happiness. And with that has come a willingness to continue no matter how hard it becomes, to persevere no matter how scary or lonely. it does seem that very few people that start this path continue it for more than a few years. Just like very few addicts get sober and stay sober. There's the effort, practice, and commitment to following the path, even when you don't want to do it. But that level is balanced by this other mysterious level, like some sort of grace. From a Buddhist perspective, that other level is karma. Our own past actions have dictated that we are on the path and will continue on the path. In order to fully accept that, we have to understand reincarnation. And since I don't have any recollection of my past lives, I don't claim to completely understand reincarnation. So I like to think about it as grace. On the other hand, perhaps it's as simple as courage. The courage to begin, to continue, and to complete the task we took birth for. Maybe that's enough for tonight. I didn't quite get through the chapter, but that's okay. Last piece, and then any questions, think about any questions you might have, comments you'd like to make. Last piece, the end of this chapter, skipped ahead a little bit. If your spiritual practice is all pleasant all of the time, you are probably not doing it right. And it may be that very few people have the kind of commitment to go through a heart-wrenching, dark night of the soul type of experience. Again, that's probably why the Buddha described this path as leading against the stream. It is said that eventually we will understand impermanence so directly that we will see death everywhere. The end of each moment will become so clear that we will know the end of each experience. It may be terrifying to see the truth of constant change and non-stability in the advanced stage of awakening. The fact is, I don't know what it would be like to be enlightened, because I'm not. I'm still attached to many things. What I do know is that meditation and spiritual practice have lessened the suffering in my life and changed my relationship to craving. I also know that I am committed to continuing the path, no matter how hard it gets or how pleasurable it becomes. Just reflecting on that last stage. Yeah, I probably wrote, this is from the Against the Stream book, and I think I wrote this about 15 years ago. And just reflecting on the commitment that I had 15 years ago and where I'm at now. And that statement of committed to continuing no matter how hard it gets. And I feel like the last few years of my life and practice have given me one opportunity after the next to test that statement and that hypothesis of how committed I am. And what I saw was that my marriage ended, and I used that as an opportunity to practice forgiveness and compassion and letting go. And my father died, and I used that as an opportunity to practice compassion and forgiveness and asking for and offering forgiveness and letting go. And I was falsely accused of a heinous crime and, subject to a ton of criticism and betrayal by some of my closest friends and teachers. And the Dharma was all that I turned to. It was all that I turned to see me through this human condition where heartbreak and sorrow and betrayal and loss is just part of what we have here on this, part of what we're dealing with. So, fully committed, no matter how difficult or how pleasurable the path becomes. And I hope that you find that kind of commitment for your practice too, for your path, for your life. And I'm open if you have any questions. I did see a couple come through on the, let me see. I saw this great question earlier. I I was talking about the importance of nothing worth clinging to, and somebody said, something about what's the difference between clinging and embracing. Let me see if I can find it. I can't find it. Maybe it got erased. But I will say there is a difference, when we're talking about non-attachment. Okay, clinging versus embracing. I'm going to put it on the screen. Frank was saying clinging versus embracing. Clinging is this. If you're still here, Frank, and you're watching, clinging is trying to hold on and control and not let the impermanent thing happen. And then when it happens, it is torn from your grasp and you suffer. Clinging is trying to control. Embracing is this, is touching, is connecting, but knowing that it's impermanent and whatever you're embracing is going to change. So it's a gentle, it's a light hug, not a shackle. So absolutely part of what mindfulness is, part of what the Buddhist path is embracing life, is showing up, is turning towards, is an intimacy with, is feeling completely connected to what's happening, but understanding that what's happening is changing, so not trying to keep it from changing, which is clinging, but connection 100%. I like that question. Thank you for asking it. See if there's any other questions. Well, it looks like mostly people are leaving nice comments. Thank you for leaving nice comments. And I'm glad that it's resonating. The question on Instagram that says, hi Ashley, it says, how do you deal with days where the human condition feels like too much? I'm having a weird day. There's that whole section about fear, like when we really get intimate with our mind and our heart, and there is that part of our mind that says, I can't handle this, it's too much, it's too overwhelming. My sense is that that is never true. There's like our human capacity is so much bigger than our small mind allows, that actually we can tolerate lots. Somebody else was just making a comment about how her father and her brother just died in a car accident, or I don't know if it was recent or not, but our human capacity for heartbreak, for stress, for fear, for loss is so big. And it's really just the mind that says, this is too much. I believe that is a thought that is underestimating actually our capacity to be uncomfortable and to be sad and to be lonely and to be stressed out or whatever it is that feels like it's too much. It's just fear. It's just that part of the mind saying you can't handle it. And it's not truth. It's not truth. So I don't know if I'm giving you any practical other than trying to reframe it as in those thoughts of like this is too much are natural. They're not your fault, but they're also just not true. It's just a heavy day. It's just a lot of pain, and actually it's okay to be in pain. So much of what meditation is teaching us is learn to be uncomfortable. It's unavoidable. You're going to have those days, those moments, those losses, one of the reasons why we sit and we sit still and we sit for long periods of time, and we learn to get comfortable being uncomfortable. And we do that, and we turn towards our mind, and we turn towards our heart, and we see our capacity for tragedy, our capacity for loss, our capacity for sorrow is immense. And there was a whole bunch of pieces in that section about, when it feels like it's too much, try to redirect your attention. If you're lost and ruminating and resenting, disengage from the mind, come back to the body, breathe into it, soften around it. Do loving kindness, replace those thoughts, do compassion practice. So there are ways to counter some of those feelings, but I really like this perspective of just know that your capacity to be with it is immense. There's a question here. I like this one. I only have a few minutes left, but let me try to get to another couple. Rick is asking, is perception itself an act of thinking? At times, is the practice asking us to place perception itself on hold? Yes and no. Yes to the first part. Perception. We are training the mind with the mind. Now, we are being asked to, like a prohibition on future and past, but we are being invited to use the mind to analyze and reflect and investigate what's happening right here now. So it takes it takes thought to then check in and bring awareness to, what's my perception? Is this pleasant, unpleasant, or neutral? It is a thought. It is but that's okay. It's the correct use of the mind. We're training the mind with the mind. At times, is the practice asking us to place perception itself on hold? I want to say no when it comes to really practicing mindfulness, but if you're doing concentration practices, then the answer is yes. Sometimes we get so concentrated that we are ignoring the mind fully, and part of the absorption, what we call the jhanas, would actually place perception on hold. You'll get to a place, if you get super concentrated, where the mind stays still, the body dissolves, perception is gone, there's neither consciousness nor a lack of consciousness, there's another feeling, so it's just like there is a deep meditative concentration where perception will pretty much go away. So yes, and my own bias is those are interesting. Some people say that they're necessary. My own feeling is that those deep states of concentration aren't that useful. And if anything, they can be dangerous because we can get so attached to them. And this is the kind of most common, what I feel like is a delusion about meditation, which is I'm going to get so deep and everything's going to be silent. And it's like, okay, yeah, you can do that. If you meditate your ass off, you can get super silent, but that's not going to change your relationship to your mind when the concentration wears off. You're going to still be attached and aversive and self-centered, and the causes of suffering are just doing push-ups while you're ignoring them. So this is where mindfulness is really like turn towards. Don't ignore. Okay, let's see if there's another one. Okay, Galen, I'm glad that other question about making a bigger capacity for heartbreak during divorce. Yeah, it has, also grief. I think that the Buddha talked about grief a little bit, but I really like the way Elizabeth Kubler-Ross identified that there's these stages to grief, and that we can get to acceptance, but first there's the anger and the bargaining and this whole process that goes along with loss and grief, and that we just have to accept it's part of what our minds are going to do in a big loss like the end of a relationship or divorce. But that we actually have the capacity for it. We can walk through it, and we can be uncomfortable, and we can be heartbroken, and we can forgive. And we can forgive ourselves, and I just always land in this place is like, is anything really worth suffering about? If we have the tools to not suffer about it, why are we clinging when our only rational option is to let go? And letting go is easier said than done, so that's why we start sending forgiveness. I forgive you to yourself, to your partner, to whomever. There's a question here about trauma. I'm going to put it on the screen. Thank you, Clifford. This is an important question. Any comments on early trauma, or any trauma, I suppose, where feelings we may be feeling in the present are triggered from trauma in the past? Much harder to trace some of these to their source. I don't know that we always need to trace everything to its source. Sometimes it's obvious, and the more familiar we get with it. Here's what I want to say, Clifford. I don't know exactly what to say about tracking them to their source. What I want to say is that I had a lot of trauma in my early life, and I think that the trauma resolution that I experienced was through meditation, learning to sit with my pain and turn towards it. And there is some investigation, and sometimes in meditation you get more clarity about what we're suffering about. But also, I don't know if you're familiar with EMDR, eye movement desensitization reprocessing. I learned that a few years ago after I'd been doing sitting and walking meditation for decades. And the core philosophy with that kind of trauma resolution approach is bilateral attention, bringing the attention back and forth from right to left, while reflecting on painful memories. And I realized I've been doing that on Buddhist meditation retreats and in my walking meditation practice. And this, thinking of, getting triggered, whatever's happening, right, left. And that the attention's going back and forth. And the thought here is that we hold those traumatic memories in our amygdala, the brainstem, the fight or flight. And that something about the bilateral attention based in mindfulness starts to move them up to the neocortex, the memory center, where they rightfully should live. So mostly I want to offer this practical encouragement to you to do walking practice. Just walk back and forth in your house or in your yard or wherever. You don't have to go on a walk. Take a 20-foot patch and just do walking practice back and forth, bringing attention to the footsteps, left, right, and do it long term, like do it regularly for the next year and see what happens and more insight that you get and how those traumatic, what we call triggers, start to change. Okay, I think I need to choose one last question. We're just about out of time. Okay, I like this. Sloan Modernist, thank you for this, because actually as I was reading that, from 15 years ago, and I'm using that term grace back then, and this question is your current understanding that the difference in people who keep meditating and those who don't, and those who stay sober and don't, is grace, or have your thoughts on that changed since riding against the stream? I feel much less comfortable using the term grace now than I did then. I've definitely moved more and more towards atheist and non-theistic Buddhist humanist psychology than I was established then 15 years. I love the question because it has changed. But I still don't know the answer. The Buddhist answer is karma. But it's such an unsatisfactory answer. I don't know why some of us get sober and stay sober, and other people, or people come to meditation and they keep meditating and they do the decades and they have these huge transformations, and other people come for a little while and don't follow through. Or even more confusing is the people who meditate for decades but don't seem to change that much. Those are the even more confusing ones. So I don't know the answer, and that's why I would, back then I was assigning this like, well, it seems like grace, but grace is not a very Buddhist concept, as I say in the book. And I feel less comfortable with the term grace now. So I feel more in the kind of like, I don't know. I don't know why I keep practicing and other people don't. I don't know why. I mean, there is some practical things. Like I keep practicing because I keep practicing. I keep going to retreats. I keep showing up. I stay sober because I dedicate my life to service and, all of those things. And most of the time where people fall off of their recovery or fall out of their practice is when they stop doing the work. So, one of the obvious practical things is if you keep doing the thing and keep being of service and showing up to the community, whether it's Sangha or fellowship, and you're more likely to keep practicing. All right, I know that there's some other cool questions here, but I don't have time for them. Thank you for your consideration of these teachings. Like all of the teachings that I offer, and I'll speak for the rest of the people teaching it against the stream, we're not asking for blind faith. We're asking for your wise reflection, and that these are offerings for your consideration. Open-handed, sometimes very opinionated, but certainly not asking for you to believe us, but encouraging you to find out for yourself what's true. And I hope that these teachings are useful, beneficial to you. Against the Stream is a non-profit organization, a 501c3. And as you can imagine, not much money coming in these times where the center isn't open. So if you're watching online, or if you watch this later, the recording, and you can make a donation, greatly appreciated. Anything helps. If you are able to and inspired to become a monthly supporter through our website, againstthestream.com, you could sign up to say, hey, I can give $25 a month or $50 a month or whatever you can give. Please consider donating generously. We offer the teachings freely, and the students who usually come here or tune in support the center and support me as a teacher. So thank you for your generosity. Those links might be on your Facebook and YouTube channel, and if they're not, please just come over to the againstthestream.com and sign up for our mailing list and give us some money. Thanks, guys. Appreciate it. May any goodness that comes be shared outward in all directions with all beings. May each one of us get as free as we can, and together may we create a positive change on this planet. I will see you Wednesday morning here, and then Thursday night I'll be doing a Refuge Recovery live stream. So come over, follow the Refuge Recovery page if you'd like to check those. Also on YouTube, Refuge Recovery World Services. And I've been mostly doing walking meditation on Wednesdays, so tune in to do some walking practice with me. Nice to connect with you all. See you next week.